Chapter 1. The Rhythm of Small-Town Life. Brett Summers had always believed that a hardware store was the heartbeat of a small town. Not the diner, not the post office, though both had their charms, but the place where people came when something broke, when something needed fixing, when life demanded a little grit and a handful of nails. Summers Hardware sat on the corner of Main and Willow, its faded green awning flapping gently in the January wind. Inside, the scent of lumber and machine oil mingled with the faint sweetness of coffee from the pot Brett kept on the counter. He didn't drink much of it himself, too jittery, but customers liked it and Brett liked customers happy. He leaned against the counter now, watching the two high school kids he'd hired for the afternoon shift. Tyler, tall and lanky, was stacking paint cans like he was building a tower for a science fair. Emma, shorter and sharper, was scrolling on her phone between customers, thumbs flying like hummingbird wings. You know, Brett said, his voice carrying across the aisles, if you spent half as much time learning the difference between a Phillips and a flathead as you do on TikTok, you'd be unstoppable. Emma didn't look up. Phillips is the one with the plus sign. Flathead is the one that looks like it gave up on life. Boom. Unstoppable. Tyler snorted. She's not wrong. Brett shook his head, smiling despite himself. Fair enough. He didn't really need help in the store. Summers Hardware wasn't exactly bustling. Most days he could handle the trickle of customers on his own. But he liked giving kids a chance to earn a little money. In a town like Maplewood, opportunities were as scarce as cell service in a thunderstorm. Looking out the front window, Brett saw the same view he'd seen for years. The diner across the street with its neon sign flickering like a tired firefly. The barber shop next door with its striped pole spinning lazily. The old movie theater that hadn't shown a film since Brett was in high school. Maplewood was a town stuck 20 years in the past. Sure, people had smartphones and streaming services, but the latest TikTok trends didn't exactly set hearts racing here. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. One of the biggest problems he'd seen over the years was the way trade schools had fallen out of favor. Everyone talked about college like it was the only ticket to success. But Brett knew better. Not everyone was going to college, and half of those who did probably shouldn't be there. He'd seen too many kids drown in debt for degrees they didn't want, chasing jobs that didn't exist. He wanted to do something about that. Something real. A workshop, maybe. A program to teach practical skills. Give regular kids a chance without burying them under loans. It was an idea that had been rattling around in his head for months, but ideas were easy. Action was harder. The bell above the door jingled, pulling Brett from his thoughts. Mrs. Callahan shuffled in, bundled in a coat that looked like it had fought and lost a battle with a snowstorm. She was clutching a broken broom handle like it was a wounded soldier. "Afternoon, Brett," she said, her voice warm despite the chill. "Got anything to fix this?" "Afternoon, Mrs. Callahan." Brett took the broom, inspecting the splintered wood. "Looks like it's seen better days. Haven't we all?" she said with a wink. He chuckled, grabbing a replacement handle from the rack. "Here you go. Easy fix." As he rang her up, Mrs. Callahan leaned in conspiratorially. "You hear about the Donovan place?" Brett raised an eyebrow. "The old Victorian on Maple Street? That's the one. Claire Donovan, niece of the late Margaret, just moved in. Came all the way from the city, they say. Pretty thing, too." Brett smiled politely, though his curiosity sparked. "Didn't know anyone wanted that house. It's a fixer-upper." Mrs. Callahan's eyes twinkled. "Maybe she likes a challenge." When she left, Brett found himself staring out the window again, the broom handle still in his hand. A newcomer. That didn't happen often in Maplewood. People left, sure, but they rarely came back. And when they did, they usually had a reason. He wondered what hers was. Chapter 2. The Arrival. The Donovan house sat like a stubborn relic at the end of Maple Street, its Victorian bones creaking under the weight of decades. The paint had peeled to a dull gray, shutters hung askew, and the porch sagged like it had given up hope. Brett had driven past it 1,000 times, always thinking the same thing. That place needs more than a coat of paint. It needs a miracle. Today, the miracle had a name. Claire Donovan stood on the porch, wrestling with a lock that refused to cooperate. Her auburn hair was pulled into a messy bun, a pencil tucked behind one ear like she'd been taking notes on how to tame the beast of a door. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms smudged with dust. A cardboard box sat at her feet, labeled in bold black marker, "Kitchen stuff." Brett hadn't planned to stop. He was on his way back from delivering a box of screws to the school maintenance guy. But when he saw her, half bent, muttering under her breath like she was negotiating with the door, his truck slowed of its own accord. He parked at the curb, climbed out and called, "Looks like you're in a standoff." Claire straightened, startled. Her eyes, green, bright, and sharp, met his. For a moment, Brett forgot how words worked. "Yeah," she said finally, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's winning." Brett walked up the path, boots crunching on gravel. "Mind if I take a look?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Be my guest. Maybe it likes you better." He crouched, examining the lock. It was old, brass dulled to a tarnished brown, the kind of hardware that belonged in a museum or a nightmare. This thing's been here since Roosevelt was in office, he said. The first one. Claire laughed. A quick, warm sound that made Brett's chest tighten. Figures. My aunt wasn't big on upgrades. Got a screwdriver? He asked. She gestured to the box. Somewhere in there. I packed like a lunatic. Brett rummaged through the box, finding a mismatched set of utensils, a whisk, and, finally, a screwdriver with a chipped red handle. This'll do. He worked the screws loose, the metal groaning in protest. Claire watched, arms crossed, expression curious. You do this for a living? Sort of, Brett said. I run the hardware store on Main. Her eyebrows lifted. Summers Hardware? That's me. Well, she said. Guess I picked the right stranger to bother. Brett smiled, focusing on the lock. You're not bothering me. Beats paperwork. With a final twist, the lock surrendered. Brett pushed the door open, revealing a dim hallway lined with faded wallpaper and the faint smell of mothballs. Claire exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for hours. You're a lifesaver, she said. Just a guy with a screwdriver, Brett replied, handing it back. She took it, their fingers brushing briefly. Brett felt the spark. Small, quick, but enough to make him glance away before she noticed. So, he said, clearing his throat. You moving in? Claire nodded. Renovating first. This place needs, well, everything. Yeah, Brett said, surveying the porch. You're not wrong. She grinned. I like a challenge. Brett believed her. There was something in her stance, steady, determined, that told him she wasn't the type to quit when things got messy. Well, he said, stepping back. If you need supplies, you know where to find me. I do, she said. Thanks, Brett. He blinked. You know my name? She pointed to his truck, where Summers Hardware was painted in bold letters. I'm observant, right? Brett said, feeling oddly pleased. See you around, Claire. As he walked back to his truck, he couldn't help glancing over his shoulder. She was already inside, box in her arms, moving through the shadows of the old house like she belonged there. For the first time in a long time, Brett felt something stir, a sense that maybe Maplewood wasn't as predictable as he thought. Chapter 3. First Impressions and Missteps. Summers Hardware was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet Brett liked. The hum of the old ceiling fan, the soft clink of metal as he restocked screws. Simple sounds that made the world feel steady. He was halfway through organizing a shelf of drill bits when the bell above the door jingled. He turned, expecting Mrs. Callahan or maybe Hank from the auto shop. Instead, it was Claire Donovan, framed in the doorway like a scene from a movie Brett hadn't realized he'd been waiting to watch. She looked different today. Hair down, curling softly around her shoulders, a navy sweater that made her eyes look even greener. In her hands, she carried a crumpled list and an expression that said she was about to declare war on home improvement. Morning, Brett said, trying to sound casual, like his pulse hadn't just kicked into overdrive. Morning, Claire replied, stepping inside. Her gaze swept the aisles, taking in the organized chaos of tools, paint cans, and lumber. This place is impressive. Thanks, Brett said. We aim for functional with a side of charm. She smiled faintly. Well, you nailed it. Brett cleared his throat, gesturing to the counter. What can I help you with? Claire unfolded her list, smoothing it against the counter. Where do I start? I need sandpaper, paint rollers, a hammer that doesn't look like it's from a cartoon, and about a dozen other things. Brett leaned over the list, scanning her neat handwriting. You're tackling a lot. Renovating an old house isn't for the faint of heart, she said. But I'm stubborn. I can tell, Brett said before he could stop himself. Claire laughed, and Brett felt the sound settle somewhere deep, like sunlight breaking through clouds. He grabbed a basket and motioned for her to follow. Let's get you set up. They moved through the aisles, Brett pulling items with practiced ease. Sandpaper, medium grit for starters. Paint rollers, go with the angled ones. They'll save your wrists. And hammers. He paused, holding up two options. Classic claw or fiberglass handle. Claire tilted her head. Which one says, I know what I'm doing? Brett grinned. Neither. But this 1 inch, he handed her the fiberglass. Won't make you hate life after an hour. She took it, testing the weight. Feels good. Good choice, Brett said, adding it to the basket. Anything else? Claire hesitated, then said, Do you have advice? For someone who's about to rip up a kitchen floor and might cry halfway through. Brett chuckled. Rule number 1. Don't cry on the power tools. Noted, she said, smiling. They reached the counter, and Brett started ringing up her haul. He wanted to say something. Something clever. Something that didn't sound like he'd rehearsed it in his head. But before he could, Tyler and Emma appeared from the back, carrying a box of nails. Emma froze mid-step, eyes flicking from Brett to Claire like she'd just stumbled into a soap opera. Oh, she said, drawing out the syllable like a cat with a secret. Tyler grinned. Morning, Brett. Who's your friend? Brett shot them a look that could sand wood. Claire Donovan. She's renovating the old Victorian. Emma leaned on the counter, smirking. Nice. You helping her out? Just selling her supplies, Brett said, his voice tight. Claire, oblivious to the undercurrent, smiled at the teens. "Hi, I'm new in town. Welcome to Maplewood," Emma said sweetly. "Population. Everyone knows your business." Claire laughed. "I'm starting to get that." Brett bagged the last item, sliding it across the counter. "That'll do it." Claire handed him her card, her fingers brushing his again. Another spark, quick and sharp. Brett swallowed, focusing on the register like it held the secrets of the universe. "Thanks for your help," Claire said, gathering her bags. "I'll probably be back tomorrow, or later today, or both." "Anytime," Brett said and meant it. As the door closed behind her, Emma let out a low whistle. "She's cute." "Emma," Brett warned. Tyler grinned. "You're blushing, man." "I'm not," Brett said, though his ears burned like a forge. Emma smirked. "Sure. Just saying, Maplewood hasn't seen this much excitement since the pie contest of 19. Brett shook his head, but as he watched Claire's car pull away, he couldn't help thinking they were right. Chapter 4. A Town That Talks. By the time Claire's car disappeared down Main Street, Brett knew two things for certain. 1. He was in trouble. 2. Maplewood was about to have a field day. Small towns had their perks. Quiet streets, familiar faces, the comfort of knowing your neighbors. But they also had one undeniable truth. News traveled faster than a rumor in a high school hallway. And Brett Summers, who had spent years flying under the radar as the dependable hardware guy, had just become headline material. It started innocently enough. Mrs. Callahan returned that afternoon for a pack of nails and a gallon of white paint. She spotted the receipt on the counter. Claire Donovan's name printed in neat black letters, and raised an eyebrow that could slice steel. "Helping the Donovan girl, are you?" she asked, voice dripping with curiosity. Brett kept his tone neutral. "She needed supplies." Mrs. Callahan's smile was sly. "Supplies? Sure." By the time she left, Brett had the sinking feeling that half the town would know before dinner. And he wasn't wrong. The next morning, Brett stopped by the diner for coffee. The bell jingled as he stepped inside, and every head turned like he'd walked into a courtroom instead of a cafe. Conversations hushed, then resumed in whispers. Brett ignored it, sliding into his usual booth. "Morning, Brett," said Marlene, the waitress, her grin wide enough to rival the sunrise. "Coffee, please," Brett said, pretending not to notice the way she lingered. She poured the coffee, then leaned in conspiratorially. "So, Claire Donovan. She's pretty." Brett stared at his mug. "Is this on the menu now?" Marlene laughed. "Honey, in this town, gossip's the main course." Before Brett could respond, Hank from the auto shop ambled over, his suspenders straining against his shirt. "Heard you were playing knight in shining armor yesterday," Hank said, clapping Brett on the shoulder. "Fixing locks for the new girl." Brett sighed. "She needed help." "Sure," Hank said, winking. "That's what they all say." Brett finished his coffee in record time and escaped before someone started planning a wedding. Back at the hardware store, Emma and Tyler were waiting with grins that spelled trouble. "So," Emma said, hopping onto the counter. "Claire came back yet?" Brett frowned. "Why would she?" "Because," Tyler said, "she's renovating a house that looks like it survived the Civil War. She's gonna need stuff, and you're gonna be her go-to guy." Emma smirked. "Go-to guy. I like that." Brett groaned. "You two have too much free time." "Correction," Emma said. "We have front row seats to the most exciting thing to happen here since the tractor parade." Brett shook his head, but deep down he knew they weren't wrong. Claire Donovan was a spark in a town that had been running on dim light for years. And Brett, well, he wasn't sure if he was ready for the fire. That afternoon, as Brett was restocking shelves, the bell jingled again. He looked up and there she was. Claire walked in carrying a tape measure like a badge of honor. Her cheeks were flushed, her sweater dusted with sawdust, and her smile, God help him, was brighter than the fluorescent lights overhead. "Round 2, she said, holding up the tape measure. "Turns out my kitchen floor is a disaster. I need plywood. Lots of it." Brett grinned despite himself. "You're ambitious. Or insane," Claire said. "Jury's still out." He grabbed a cart and led her to the lumber section. "How bad are we talking?" "Bad," she said. "Like, I might fall through to the basement bad." "Sounds like fun," Brett said. Claire laughed. "Your definition of fun needs work." As they loaded sheets of plywood onto the cart, Brett caught himself stealing glances at the way her hair curled against her neck, at the smudge of paint on her wrist. He told himself it was harmless, just curiosity. But when she smiled at him, something in his chest shifted, like a gear clicking into place. By the time Claire left with her supplies, Brett knew 2 more things. 1. He was definitely in trouble. 2. He didn't mind one bit. Chapter 5. Sparks over sawdust. The sound of a hammer striking would echoed faintly from the Donovan house as Brett pulled his truck into the gravel driveway. He hadn't planned on being here today. At least, not until Claire had shown up at the store that morning, looking frazzled and muttering something about a floor that hates me. "You okay?" Brett had asked, leaning on the counter. Claire had sighed, dropping her forehead onto her folded arms. "Define okay. Not crying on power tools?" Brett offered. She lifted her head, eyes flashing with humor. Barely. That was all it took. 10 minutes later, Brett was loading his toolbox into the back of his truck, telling himself he was just being neighborly, helping out. Nothing more. Now, standing on Claire's porch, Brett knocked on the doorframe, because the door was wide open, and the smell of sawdust drifted out like a welcome mat. Back here, Claire's voice called from inside. Brett stepped into the hallway, boots crunching on a tarp. The house looked like a battlefield. Paint cans lined up like soldiers, wallpaper half-stripped, a ladder leaning against a wall like it had given up. He followed the sound of hammering to the kitchen and stopped short. Claire was kneeling on the floor, hair pulled into a messy ponytail, a smear of dust across her cheek. She wore ripped jeans and a faded t-shirt that read fixer-upper energy, and Brett had to bite back a laugh. "You weren't kidding," he said, surveying the scene. The kitchen floor was a patchwork of exposed beams and plywood, like someone had started a puzzle and quit halfway through. Claire looked up, grinning sheepishly. "Welcome to my nightmare." Brett crouched beside her, inspecting the work. "You've got determination. I'll give you that." "Determination doesn't keep me from falling through to the basement," she said. "I think I bit off more than I can chew." "Good thing I brought extra teeth," Brett said, lifting his toolbox onto the counter. Claire laughed, shaking her head. "You're ridiculous." "Comes with the territory," Brett said, pulling out a drill. "Let's get this floor sorted before you end up living in the crawl space." They worked side by side, the rhythm of saws and drills filling the air. Brett measured and cut while Claire held board steady, her brow furrowed in concentration. Every so often, their hands brushed, quick, accidental sparks that Brett tried not to read into, even as his pulse betrayed him. "You're good at this," Claire said after an hour, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Been doing it since I was old enough to hold a hammer," Brett said. "My dad taught me." She smiled softly. "That's nice. My dad taught me how to file taxes. Not quite as exciting." "Depends on who you ask," Brett said. "Some people love numbers." "Not me," Claire said. "I like things I can see. Fixing something broken. Making it better." Brett glanced at her, catching the flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "That why you came here?" Claire hesitated, then nodded. "Partly. I needed a fresh start. Something real." Brett wanted to ask more. What she was running from, what she hoped to find. But before he could, the drill slipped, and Claire yelped as a splinter flew past her arm. "You okay?" Brett asked, reaching for her instinctively. She laughed, brushing off the wood chip. "Battle scar. I'll survive." "Still," Brett said, his hand lingering near hers. "Maybe wear gloves next time." Claire's gaze met his, and for a moment, the air shifted, charged, quiet, like the pause before a storm. Brett felt the weight of it, heavy and sweet, and wondered if she felt it too. Then Claire cleared her throat, breaking the spell. "So, what's next?" Brett exhaled slowly, forcing his focus back to the floor. "Next, we make sure this thing doesn't collapse under your coffee table." By late afternoon, the kitchen looked less like a disaster and more like a work in progress. The new boards were solid, the gaps filled, and Claire stood with her hands on her hips, surveying the transformation. "Not bad," she said. "Not bad at all. Not bad," Brett said, feigning offense. "That's top-tier craftsmanship." Claire grinned. "Fine. It's amazing. You're amazing." Brett froze, the words hitting harder than they should. Claire didn't seem to notice. She was already reaching for a paintbrush, humming under her breath. He watched her for a moment, then packed up his tools, telling himself he wasn't disappointed that she hadn't looked at him when she said it. As Brett drove away, the sun dipping low behind the hills, he realized something. Helping Claire wasn't just about being neighborly anymore. It was about something else, something he wasn't ready to name but couldn't ignore. Chapter 6. The festival fiasco. Maplewood's annual winter festival was the kind of event that made the whole town feel alive. For one weekend, the sleepy streets transformed into a carnival of lights, laughter, and questionable culinary choices. There were booths selling everything from homemade fudge to knitted scarves, a hayride that circled the frozen pond, and, most importantly, the pie-eating contest that had become a local legend. Brett had never been much for crowds, but the festival was tradition. He parked his truck near the town square, tugged his jacket tighter against the cold, and scanned the throng of people milling about. Kids darted between booths, couples strolled hand in hand, and the scent of cinnamon and fried dough hung thick in the air. He was halfway to the coffee stand when he heard a familiar voice. "Brett!" He turned, and there was Claire, weaving through the crowd like a comet, cheeks flushed from the cold, auburn hair tumbling from beneath a knit beanie. She wore a navy coat and boots dusted with snow, and Brett felt his pulse kick like a misfired engine. "Hey!" he said, smiling despite himself. "Didn't think I'd see you here." Claire grinned. "Are you kidding? I've been looking forward to this since Mrs. Callahan told me about it. Small-town charm at its finest." "Charm," Brett said dryly. "That's one word for it." Claire laughed, falling into step beside him. "So what's the big deal about this pie contest? Everyone keeps talking like it's the Super Bowl." "It kind of is," Brett said. Winner gets bragging rights for a year. And a trophy shaped like a pie. Claire's eyes sparkled. That's amazing. Before Brett could respond, a booming voice cut through the chatter. Ladies and gentlemen, pie-eating contest starts in 5 minutes. Sign up now. Claire turned to Brett, her grin mischievous. You in? Brett blinked. Me? Yeah, she said, nudging his arm. Come on. Live a little. I'm not really scared, Claire teased. Brett narrowed his eyes. Not even close. Then prove it, she said, already heading toward the sign-up table. Brett groaned but followed, because apparently when Claire Donovan smiled like that, his common sense packed up and left town. 5 minutes later, Brett found himself seated at a long table covered in checkered cloth, facing a lineup of steaming pies. Apple, cherry, blueberry, each one a sugary mountain daring him to climb. Claire slid into the chair next to him, tying her hair back with a flourish. Ready? She asked, eyes dancing. For regret? Sure, Brett muttered. The announcer, a man in a cowboy hat who took his job far too seriously, raised a megaphone. Contestants, hands behind your backs. First one to finish their pie wins. Brett shot Claire a look. You didn't mention the no-hands rule. Adds drama, she said, grinning. Before Brett could reply, the whistle blew, and chaos erupted. Brett dove in, face first, the scent of cinnamon filling his nose. The pie was warm, gooey, and absolutely impossible to eat gracefully. Beside him, Claire was laughing so hard she could barely make progress, her cheeks smeared with blueberry filling like war paint. You're terrible at this, Brett said, mouth full, crumbs flying. So are you. Claire shot back, her voice muffled by crust. The crowd cheered, phones flashed, and Brett realized, somewhere between bite 3 and 4, that he hadn't laughed this hard in years. Not since before life got heavy and predictable. By the time the whistle blew again, Brett had managed half his pie. Claire had eaten maybe a third, and both of them looked like they'd lost a food fight. The announcer declared a winner. Some kid named Joey who looked like he'd swallowed his pie whole, and the crowd erupted in applause. Brett wiped his face with a napkin, turning to Claire. You're a menace, he said, grinning. Claire laughed, dabbing at her cheeks. You loved it. Maybe, Brett admitted. They stood, stepping away from the table, and that's when it happened. Claire slipped on a patch of snow, stumbling forward. Brett caught her instinctively, his hands gripping her arms. Her body pressed briefly against his. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. The noise of the crowd faded, the cold vanished, and Brett felt the warmth of her breath against his cheek. Her eyes met his, green, bright and startled, and Brett thought, this is it. This is the moment. Then a marching band blared to life behind them, trumpets shrieking like startled geese. Claire jerked back, laughing nervously. Brett stepped away, his heart pounding like a drumline. Well, Claire said, brushing snow from her coat. That was dramatic. Yeah, Brett said, forcing a smile. Guess the universe likes interruptions. Claire grinned, and for a second, Brett thought she might say something more. But then Emma appeared out of nowhere, phone in hand, eyes wide. Brett, she squealed. You were amazing. I got the whole thing on video. Brett groaned. Of course you did. Claire laughed, and Brett couldn't help joining in, even as he wondered what might have happened if that band had waited 30 more seconds. Chapter 7. Doubts and distance. The festival had ended 2 days ago, but Brett still felt the echo of that near moment. The slip, the catch, the way Claire's eyes had locked on his before the marching band shattered the spell. He'd replayed it more times than he cared to admit, wondering what would have happened if fate had given them 30 more seconds. Now, standing behind the counter at Summers Hardware, Brett tried to shake it off. He had shelves to stock, invoices to check, and 2 teenagers who were currently arguing about whether a socket wrench could double as a weapon in a zombie apocalypse. Tyler, Brett said, not looking up from the register. Stop trying to turn my tools into survival gear. Tyler grinned. Just planning ahead. Emma smirked. If zombies come, Brett's hardware store will be ground zero for defense. Comforting, Brett muttered. The bell above the door jingled, and Brett's head snapped up. Too fast, too obvious. Claire walked in, carrying a folder tucked under her arm, her expression thoughtful. She looked different today. Not frazzled from renovations, not laughing like at the festival. Serious, focused. Morning, Brett said, forcing his voice into neutral territory. Morning, Claire replied, offering a small smile. Got a minute? Sure, Brett said, stepping out from behind the counter. What's up? Claire placed the folder on the counter and opened it, revealing a stack of papers, blueprints by the look of it. I've been thinking about the house, about making it more than just livable. I want to restore it properly, keep the character but modernize where it counts. Brett leaned over the plans, impressed despite himself. You've done your homework. Claire nodded. I used to do this, well, not exactly this, but I worked in design. Interiors. Big projects. Brett blinked. You were a designer? Yeah, Claire said, her tone casual. But Brett caught the flicker of something in her eyes. High-end stuff. Manhattan apartments, corporate spaces. It paid well. Sounds fancy, Brett said, trying to picture her in a sleek city office, wearing heels instead of boots, sipping lattes instead of coffee from a chipped mug. It was, Claire said. And exhausting. I left after things fell apart. Brett hesitated. Things? Claire's smile was tight. Engagement. Job. All of it. I needed a reset. Brett felt a pang. Sympathy, curiosity, and something sharper. Something that whispered. She's from a different world. A world of glass towers and designer furniture. Not creaky floors and hardware stores. You're brave, Brett said finally. Starting over like that. Claire shrugged. Or stupid. Not stupid, Brett said, his voice firmer than he expected. Takes guts to walk away. Claire looked at him then, really looked, and for a moment Brett thought maybe, just maybe, he'd said the right thing. But then her phone buzzed, breaking the moment. She glanced at the screen, her expression shifting. Sorry, she said, gathering the papers. I've got to take this. Brett nodded, watching her step outside, her voice low as she answered the call. He couldn't hear the words, but he saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her free hand clenched at her side. When she returned, her smile was back, but it didn't reach her eyes. Everything okay? Brett asked. Fine, Claire said lightly. Just life stuff. She left soon after, and Brett stood staring at the door long after it closed, the doubts creeping in like shadows. Claire Donovan wasn't just renovating a house. She was rebuilding a life that had been bigger, shinier, and far more complicated than anything Brett had ever known. And suddenly, he wondered if a guy who sold nails and paint could ever fit into that picture. That night, Brett sat on his porch, nursing a beer and staring at the quiet street. The doubts gnawed at him, sharp and relentless. He thought about Claire's laugh, her determination, the way she'd said Manhattan apartments like it was another lifetime. Maybe it was. Maybe she'd wake up one day and realize Maplewood was too small, too slow, to him. The thought hit harder than he expected. Chapter 8. Advice from teenagers. The next morning, Brett was back at the hardware store, trying to lose himself in the comforting monotony of inventory. He counted boxes of nails, stacked paint cans, and told himself he wasn't waiting for the bell to jingle with Claire's arrival. He wasn't. Not really. Emma and Tyler were perched on the counter like they owned the place, sipping sodas and scrolling through their phones. Brett had given up trying to enforce the no loitering rule. They were good kids, and besides, their chatter kept the silence from swallowing him whole. You look weird, Emma said suddenly, peering at Brett over the rim of her soda. Brett frowned. Thanks. No, like, distracted, she said, hopping down. What's up? Nothing, Brett said too quickly. Tyler smirked. It's Claire, isn't it? Brett froze, a box of screws in his hand. What? Dude, Tyler said, grinning. You've been walking around like someone stole your favorite wrench. Emma crossed her arms. Spill. Brett sighed, setting the box down. It's complicated. Emma snorted. Everything's complicated if you make it that way. Brett gave her a look. You're 16. And wise beyond my years, Emma said. So what's the deal? You like her? Brett hesitated, then muttered, yeah. Then tell her, Tyler said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. It's not that easy, Brett said. She's different. From the city. Big career. Fancy life. I sell nails. Emma rolled her eyes. You also run a business, help people, and basically keep this town from falling apart. That's not nothing. Tyler nodded. Plus, she moved here. She's fixing up a house. Sounds like she wants what you've got. Brett stared at them, their words sinking in like water on dry soil. He'd been so wrapped up in what he wasn't that he hadn't stopped to think about what he was, and what Claire might actually want. You think? He asked quietly. Emma grinned. I know. And if you don't make a move, someone else will. Tyler smirked. Like Joey. He won the pie contest. Chicks dig winners. Brett groaned. God help me. Emma laughed, tossing her soda can in the trash. Seriously, Brett. Stop overthinking. Life's short. Go for it. Later, after the kids left, Brett stood behind the counter, staring at the door. Their advice echoed in his head, louder than the doubts. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was making this harder than it needed to be. Claire wasn't looking for Manhattan anymore. She was here in Maplewood, in his store, in his life. And Brett realized something. He didn't want to just watch her from the sidelines. He wanted to be part of her story. Chapter 9. The big gesture. The idea had been simmering in Brett's mind for months, but now it felt urgent, like something he needed to do. Not just for the town, but for himself. For Claire. For the future he was starting to imagine. Maplewood didn't have much in the way of opportunity. Kids graduated high school and either left for college or stayed and drifted. Brett had seen too many of them stuck, unsure, drowning in debt or dead-end jobs. He wanted to change that. He wanted to give them something real. So he decided to start small. Community workshop. Free lessons on basic home repair, woodworking, plumbing skills that could save money, build confidence, maybe even spark a career. He'd host it at the hardware store, clear out the back room, set up stations. It wasn't fancy, but it was something. And maybe, just maybe, it would show Claire what mattered to him, what he believed in. By Friday afternoon, Brett was knee-deep in preparations. He hauled lumber into the back room, set up folding tables, and printed flyers that Emma and Tyler had gleefully plastered all over town. "Fix It Friday. Learn real skills for real life," the bold letters proclaimed. "Looks good," Emma said, taping the last flyer to the front window. "You're like a hero or something." "Hardly," Brett said, adjusting a stack of toolkits. "Just trying to help." Tyler grinned. "Claire's gonna love this." Brett shot him a look. "That's not why I'm doing it." "Sure," Tyler said, smirking. "Totally unrelated." Brett ignored him, but his stomach twisted. Because, yeah, it wasn't the only reason. He wanted Claire to see that he wasn't just a guy who sold nails. He wanted her to see his heart. The workshop started at 6. By 5:30, Brett was pacing the store, nerves buzzing like live wires. People trickled in, Mrs. Callahan, Hank, a handful of teenagers, even the mayor. Brett greeted them all, smiling, explaining the stations. But his eyes kept drifting to the door. At 6:10 it opened, and there she was. Claire stepped inside, cheeks pink from the cold, auburn hair tucked into a scarf. She scanned the room, her eyes widening at the sight of the setup. "Wow," she said, walking toward him. "This is incredible." Brett shrugged, trying for casual and failing miserably. "Just something I've been thinking about. Figured it was time." Claire smiled, and Brett felt the tension ease just a little. "You're amazing," she said softly. "Seriously. This town needs this." Her words hit like sunlight breaking through clouds. Brett swallowed hard, forcing himself to focus as more people gathered around. The workshop was chaos in the best way. Brett demonstrated how to patch drywall, while Claire helped a teenager learn to use a power drill. Laughter filled the room as Hank accidentally glued his fingers together, and Mrs. Callahan declared herself the queen of caulking. Claire moved through the crowd like she belonged there, encouraging, laughing, her energy bright and warm. Every time Brett caught her eye, something in his chest tightened, like a knot pulling taut. When the last lesson wrapped up and the crowd began to thin, Claire lingered by the counter, watching Brett pack up. "You really care about this," she said quietly. "Yeah," Brett said, stacking toolkits. "Kids need options. Not everyone's meant for college. Doesn't mean they shouldn't have a shot." Claire nodded, her expression soft. "You're right, and you're doing something about it. That's rare." Brett met her gaze, the weight of her words settling deep. "It's just who I am." "I like who you are," Claire said. And for a moment, Brett forgot how to breathe. Before he could respond, Emma popped up like a jack-in-the-box. "Great job tonight, boss. Total success." Brett blinked, the spell broken. "Thanks, Emma." Claire smiled, slipping on her coat. "See you soon." "Yeah," Brett said, his voice low. "Soon." As she walked out into the cold night, Brett felt something shift, something big. For the first time, he believed maybe, just maybe, he was enough. Chapter 10. Confessions in the Rain. The storm rolled in without warning. Dark clouds swallowing the late afternoon sun. Wind whipping through Maplewood like it had a score to settle. Brett had been on his way home when the first fat drops splattered against his windshield. By the time he reached the Donovan house, rain was coming down in sheets, drumming on the roof like 1,000 impatient fists. He hadn't planned to stop. He just wanted to check on Claire, make sure the half-renovated house wasn't leaking like a sieve. But when he saw her car in the driveway and the porch light glowing faintly through the downpour, his gut told him to pull in. He jogged to the porch, soaked in seconds, and knocked hard on the doorframe. "Claire." The door swung open, and there she was, hair damp, sweater clinging to her shoulders, eyes wide with surprise. "Brett, what are you?" "Storm's bad," he said, stepping inside as thunder cracked overhead. "Figured you might need help." Claire laughed breathlessly, pushing the door shut against the wind. "You're like the hardware store superhero. Just trying to keep you from floating away," Brett said, brushing water from his jacket. The house was dim, shadows pooling in corners, the hum of rain filling the silence. Claire led him to the kitchen, where a single lamp cast a warm glow over the plywood floor they'd laid together. Buckets lined the walls, catching drips from the ceiling. "Roof's leaking," she said, grimacing. "I was about to start a bucket orchestra." Brett scanned the damage, then shook his head. "You'll need a tarp. I can grab one from my truck." "Not in this rain," Claire said, touching his arm. "You'll drown." Her hand lingered warm, steady, and Brett felt something shift, deep and undeniable. He looked at her, really looked, and the words he'd been holding back for weeks pressed hard against his chest. "Claire," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." She froze, her eyes searching his. "What?" Brett swallowed, heart pounding like the storm outside. "I like you. More than I should, probably. And I know you've got this whole life. Big plans, big dreams. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel it." The silence stretched, heavy and fragile. Rain hammered the roof, wind howled through the eaves, and Brett wondered if he just made the biggest mistake of his life. Then Claire stepped closer, her breath warm against his skin. "You think I don't feel it too?" Brett blinked. "You?" "I left Manhattan because I was tired of pretending," she said softly. "Tired of chasing things that didn't matter. And then I came here and you matter, Brett." The words hit like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Brett exhaled, relief and hope tangling in his chest. "Claire." She smiled, small, shaky, beautiful. And Brett didn't think. He just moved. Their lips met, tentative at first, then deeper, like the storm had cracked something open inside them both. Claire's hands slid into his hair, Brett's arms wrapped around her waist, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the warmth between them, the taste of rain on her skin, the sound of their hearts beating in sync. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, Claire laughed softly. "Guess we're stuck here until the storm passes." Brett grinned, brushing a damp strand of hair from her cheek. "Fine by me." They spent the next hour talking, really talking, about her past, his dreams, the workshop, the house, about fear and hope and second chances. And when the storm finally eased, Brett realized something. He didn't just want Claire in his life. He wanted to build a life with her, one project at a time. Chapter 11. When plans go awry, the storm had passed, but its aftermath lingered, in puddles on the streets, in the scent of rain-soaked earth, and in Brett's chest, where hope had bloomed like wildflowers. The kiss, the laughter, the quiet confessions, they'd felt like the start of something real, something solid. For 2 days, Brett walked around like a man with a secret, grinning at nothing, humming under his breath while stocking shelves. Even Emma noticed. "You're terrifyingly cheerful," she said, eyeing him as she rang up a customer. "Did you win the lottery?" "Something like that," Brett said and left it at that. But by Thursday afternoon, the glow dimmed. Claire walked into the store just before closing, her expression tight, her steps quick. Brett's smile faltered as he saw the folder in her hand, the same sleek leather one she'd carried when she showed him her blueprints. "Hey," he said, trying for lightness. "You look intense." Claire exhaled, setting the folder on the counter. "I got a call today." Brett's stomach dipped. "Okay. From a firm in Santa Fe," she said. "They want me to head up a design project. Big one. 6 months, maybe more." Brett stared, the words hitting like a hammer to the ribs. "Santa Fe," he repeated, slow and flat. Claire nodded, her eyes searching his. "It's a great opportunity. Good money. Creative freedom. And it's not here," Brett said. "No," Claire said softly. "It's not." Silence stretched between them, heavy and brittle. Brett felt the old doubts surge, the ones he thought he'd buried after the storm. She was city, he was small town. She was big projects, he was bolts and nails. And now, the gap between them yawned wide again. "So what happens to the house?" Brett asked finally, his voice sharper than he intended. "I'd keep working on it," Claire said quickly. "Weekends, maybe. Or hire help." "Hire help?" Brett repeated, bitterness creeping in. "Guess I'm out of a job." Claire flinched. "Brett, don't do that." "Do what?" he snapped. "Act like this doesn't change everything?" Her eyes flashed. "I didn't ask for this call. I didn't plan it. But I can't ignore it either." "Why not?" Brett shot back. "You came here for a fresh start. For something real. Was that just temporary?" Claire's breath hitched, and for a moment Brett saw the hurt in her eyes, raw and unguarded. "I don't know," she whispered. "I thought I knew what I wanted. Then you happened. And now I'm confused." Brett's anger deflated, leaving something worse, fear. Fear of losing her. Fear of being left behind. "Claire," he said, softer now. "I don't want you to go." Her eyes shimmered, and Brett thought she might cry. But then she shook her head, grabbed the folder, and turned toward the door. "I need time," she said, her voice breaking, "to think." And then she was gone, the bell jingling like a cruel punchline. That night, Brett sat on his porch, staring at the dark street, the beer in his hand untouched. The doubts roared back, louder than ever. Maybe he'd been a fool to think he could hold onto someone like Claire Donovan. Maybe dreams like his didn't fit with lives like hers. But even as the fear gnawed at him, one truth burned bright. He didn't want to give up. Not yet. Not without a fight. Chapter 12. Nuts, bolts, and promises. The next 2 days crawled by like a stubborn winter thaw. Brett kept busy, restocking shelves, fixing a leaky faucet for Mrs. Callahan, even sanding down a warped door for Hank. But his mind never strayed far from Claire. Every time the bell above the hardware store door jingled, his heart jumped, hoping it was her. It never was. By Saturday evening, Brett had made up his mind. He wasn't going to sit around waiting for fate to decide his future. He'd spent too many years letting life happen instead of chasing what mattered. And Claire Donovan mattered. So he drove to Maple Street, the truck rumbling through quiet roads, headlights slicing through the dusk. The Donovan house loomed ahead, its silhouette softened by the glow of porch lights. Brett parked, grabbed the small box he'd brought. A gesture, simple but honest, and walked up the path, his boots crunching on gravel. He knocked, heart pounding like a misfired nail gun. The door opened slowly, and there she was, hair loose, sweater soft, eyes tired but warm. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Claire smiled faintly. Hey, hey, Brett said, his voice rough. Can we talk? She stepped aside, letting him in. The house smelled faintly of paint and coffee, the kitchen lamp casting a golden pool of light over the plywood floor they'd laid together. Brett set the box on the counter, then turned to face her. I've been thinking, he said, words tumbling out before doubt could stop them. About us. About everything. Claire's brow furrowed. Brett, just let me say this, he said, holding up a hand. I know you've got choices, big ones, and I'd never ask you to give up something that matters to you. But I need you to know, you matter to me, more than I can explain. Her breath hitched, and Brett pressed on, his voice steady now. I'm not fancy. I don't have a big career or a skyline view. But I've got roots. I've got this town, this store, this life, and I want you in it. Not because I need saving, not because I'm scared of change, but because when I'm with you, everything feels right. He opened the box, revealing a small wooden plaque he'd carved himself. The words were simple, etched in clean lines. Build something that lasts. Claire stared at it, her fingers trembling as she traced the letters. Brett, I made it for you, he said softly. For the house. For us, if you want that. Silence stretched, thick with emotion. Then Claire looked up, her eyes shimmering. I turned down the job. Brett blinked. You what? I called them this morning, she said, her voice steady now. Told them I couldn't take it. Because I came here for a reason. And it wasn't just to fix a house. It was to fix me. And somehow you became part of that. Relief crashed over Brett like a wave, leaving him breathless. Claire. She smiled then, wide, bright, beautiful. And Brett closed the distance between them, pulling her into his arms. Her laughter spilled against his chest as he kissed her, slow and sure, like a promise. When they broke apart, Claire rested her forehead against his. So what now? Brett grinned, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Now, we build something that lasts. Later, as they stood in the kitchen, hanging the plaque on the wall, Brett felt the weight of the past weeks lift. The doubts, the fear, the what-ifs, they all faded, replaced by something solid, something real. Claire Donovan wasn't leaving. She was staying. And together, they were going to make Maplewood and each other better than ever. Chapter 13. Building together, spring had come to Maplewood, soft and slow, painting the hills in green and the sky in endless blue. The Donovan house stood proudly at the end of Maple Street. No longer a relic but a reborn beauty. Fresh paint gleaming, shutters straight, porch sturdy beneath pots of blooming flowers. Inside, sunlight spilled across polished floors, catching on details that spoke of care and love. The restored crown molding, the hand-built shelves, the plaque on the kitchen wall that read build something that lasts. Brett stood in the doorway, taking it all in with a quiet sense of pride. Not just for the house but for what it represented. For what they'd built together. Looks good, doesn't it? Claire's voice floated from behind him, warm and teasing. He turned, grinning as she walked in, hair shining in the sunlight, a smudge of paint still on her wrist, a badge of honor from their last project. Better than good, Brett said. It's perfect. Claire laughed, slipping her arm through his. You're biased. Maybe, Brett said, pressing a kiss to her temple. But I'm allowed. They wandered through the rooms, memories tucked into every corner. The late nights sanding floors, the laughter over crooked shelves, the quiet talks when exhaustion made words soft and honest. Hadn't been easy. Nothing worth having ever was. But they'd done it. Together. Later, they sat on the porch swing, mugs of coffee in hand, watching the town wake up. Across the street, kids rode bikes, their laughter ringing like bells. Brett's gaze drifted to the hardware store sign visible down the block, and he smiled. The workshop had taken off. What started as a one-night event had become a monthly tradition, drawing teens and adults alike. Brett had even partnered with the local school to offer summer classes, basic carpentry, plumbing, electrical work, real skills for real life, the kind of thing he'd always dreamed of doing. And Claire? She'd thrown herself into the project with him, designing flyers, organizing schedules, even teaching a class on interior design basics. Watching her light up as she helped others reminded Brett of something she'd said that night in the storm. I came here for something real. He believed her now, because this was as real as it got. You know, Claire said, breaking the comfortable silence. I've been thinking. Dangerous, Brett teased. She elbowed him lightly. About what's next. Brett's heart skipped. Next? Claire nodded, her smile soft. The house is done. The workshop's thriving. So, maybe it's time to start planning something else. Like what? Brett asked, though hope was already blooming in his chest. Claire met his gaze, eyes bright. Like us. Brett set his mug down, turning fully toward her. Claire Donovan, are you saying what I think you're saying? She grinned. Depends. What do you think I'm saying? That you're ready to build something that lasts, Brett said, his voice low, steady. Claire's smile widened. With you? Always. Brett kissed her then, slow, sure, like the promise they'd carved into wood months ago. And as the swing creaked gently beneath them, Brett realized something. Life wasn't about grand gestures or perfect plans. It was about moments like this, quiet, steady, full of love. Months later, the Donovan house would host its first summer barbecue, laughter spilling across the yard as friends gathered under strings of lights. The workshop would expand. The town would buzz with new energy, and Brett and Claire would keep building. Projects, dreams, a life together. One nail, one board, one kiss at a time.